Here we are, Monday morning. Coffee ready. You just got back from a trip, my friend.
I did.
How was it?
It was glorious, and I heard...
What, you didn't miss the minus 50 with wind chills of minus 80, being colder than Mars? You didn't miss any of that?
So I was in Toronto for that. So I actually was cold in Toronto.
Toronto, I find
cold.
like bone chilling because of that wet. Oh, it's horrible.
So that was
If
cold.
any Torontonians are out there.
Yeah, sorry.
Just your weather. Yeah.
Love Toronto, great city. Then I was in Jamaica, and it was so beautiful, and I probably was a little bit too cocky about that because now I'm back in this cold weather with everyone.
I know. I always find it so funny when people are all like bragging if they went away somewhere hot. I'm like, yeah, but you gotta come back.
Gotta come back. It's not spring.
Yeah, let's not brag too much. You're still coming back to this, so it's all good. I hear it's supposed to be a lot of snow today or something like that, so that should be fun.
But the weather, it's not as cold.
No,
so I'll take it.
It was actually funny. I was talking to my husband after the minus 50, and I'm like, I never thought the day would come where I'd be like, I'm so thankful it's minus 30 today.
Yes.
That's when you know it's really
30?
bad. Yeah, exactly.
You guys, you can go outside.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I can go outside without dying. It's perfect.
Yes.
Anyways, so today we wanted to talk a little bit about our January numbers. They were really strong, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about property taxes. Yay! And we're going to talk about the forecast breakfast. So Winnipeg Realtors did a great thing, and they put on an annual forecast breakfast. They brought in a great speaker from CIBC, and he talked about the general market and what's going on and what we can kind of expect and some of the different forces that are affecting our market of all of Canada, but then also some that's affecting us here in Winnipeg. So yeah, well, let's get started on January's numbers.
Right, so I know that we put up the images, so you guys probably have seen these photos, but what that doesn't tell you is the backstory of how we create these images and what they actually mean. So when you look at those market shares, what we're seeing is that the $200,000 to $300,000 range actually makes 47% up of the detached homes market. So that's going to be, and it
always is.
Historically has always been a really hot pocket, and it will be continuing into this year. According to 2018, our average home sale for a detached house is $321,000, making Winnipeg one of the most affordable metropolitan cities in Canada.
The thing that actually struck me about that is what you have to make in order to be able to afford that. So other cities, you have to be making, what was it, like 200 in order to afford a median house, which means you kind of sit in the middle of all the houses that are selling. That's what it would take for you to combine. You can make that together. But a lot of households, they're lucky if they make 60, 70,000. But what was promising in that, if you are making kind of that average combined family income, you could still afford a house here in Winnipeg, which is very, very cool about our market.
It's encouraging for sure, because that number is actually to the number 58,976, which if you're looking at two incomes combined, it's not out of reach.
It's doable, yeah.
So that was a really great number. Those numbers are good to see, and they're exciting as people who work obviously in selling homes, but it's great because we're not discouraged for our first-time home buyers. There is a way into the market, and that's something that I know we are both really strong advocates of the first-time home buyer. We love working with them, and the ability to represent them in a balanced market is really great from a realtor's perspective.
Absolutely.
The other thing that was interesting is actually this past January 2019 was the best recorded January in history.
Crazy.
Despite
our minus polar vortex situation we had.
Colder than Antarctic temperatures. I don't know, you guys. You guys are crazy.
You guys are troopers, man. It was so funny because I'm from Calgary originally, and we were talking to some of our cohorts right there. And honestly, I think they just got minus 30 over the weekend, and they stopped. Everything stopped. No one goes anywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, minus 30? We're out in our shorts, and we're like, anyways.
Yeah, we're like, let's get the water parks
buying some houses. That's what
So based on the market release, and we'll touch base onto this going into the forecast breakfast, but looking at these numbers, what does this mean to you going into 2019?
Well, typically, I'll say, okay, so last year, I would say January was a fairly slow month. Again, we had really, really cold temperatures,
Yeah.
so we were kind of like, well, it's the weather, whatever. So the fact that we had even colder temperatures this year, but yet our market stayed nice, warm, and toasty, that's actually a really good thing. I think there's a bit more optimism back in the market. There's a little, although there are a lot of moving parts in our economy, like there always are, I think there's a few things in place. The Bank of Canada is starting to slow down on these interest rate hikes. There's a few things like that. So hopefully what that's saying to our market is, and that buyers are just starting to feel a little more confident about getting out there and getting that house or that bigger house that they need, and that the whole market is kind of just chugging along really nicely. So
I think too, like, there's always a new normal, and it takes an adjustment period. And I think people have just succumbed to the fact that this is the way it is. And you know what? We just gotta keep pushing forward.
yeah. Well, and what's funny is this is a little bit further ahead of what we're going to talk about, but at the forecast breakfast for the youngins, not that I'm that old, just to clarify, but anyway, sometimes you feel like you are. But they were saying that if you, like, I'm almost 40, so I even didn't see the rates when they were like 18, 19, 20%. It was like buying a house on a credit card in the 80s. So I was too young to really understand that. But think about that. When my parents were buying a house, or my in-laws, they always tell me, Monica, our first house that we bought at, I think, 16% interest. Like, that's insane. So we've seen record lows, but for those of us who are first-time buyers or just kind of got into the market within the last 10, 12 years, we're like, what? It's going up a percentage point, because we're used to like substantially lower rates. We've never seen them climb into the double digits. So it's kind of interesting in that way. And when you look at the perspective that way, it's true. We do have very, very affordable rates. Hopefully our federal government will see that we don't need to be harnessing the entire Canadian market, because a couple of markets kind of went a little bit out of sorts. But again, we'll see what happens. So anyways.
Right.
Not sure where I went there. So bring us back in.
Sellers. That's where you went there. Sellers and buyers, in terms of what we're looking at for this upcoming market. We can get into that a little bit. But when we were talking about sellers, we did want to talk about property taxes, because we understand that those just came out.
Yeah.
So what happened this weekend?
So this weekend I went to go visit with somebody who just needed a little bit of guidance on their house. And so it was more just a little chat. And so it was her elderly mom's house. They need to sell it because obviously she can't live in this house anymore. And one of the things she brought up was her property taxes. And we get this conversation a lot when we go to meet with people about the value of their home. We always look at property assessments because we want to gauge for the style of house it is, how big it is, how many bedrooms, air conditioning, have permits been pulled, etc., etc. But also on there it tells us what the city assesses your property for. And I would say, and I don't know if you'd agree, one of the biggest conversation points is, well, the city assesses my house at X amount of dollars, so that's what it should sell for. So we either get that conversation or we get the conversation of, oh, the city doesn't assess our house for as much as I think it's worth.
Right.
Either way, I think we end up losing. But
yes. Either way, you tailor it to how you want it.
Tailor it to what you need. And so city assessments, the interesting part that we need to always remind our clients is that city assessments are, okay, when I started in real estate 12 years ago, I would say city assessments were about 2/3 of what the market value was. So if your house was worth on the market, like what it could sell for, $250, your assessment was at like around $180,000 or $200,000. So there was a big discrepancy there. I would say in the last 12 years, the city has done a very quick job of bringing those two numbers much closer, and in some cases surpassing what some of these houses would sell for on the market. And reason being is that the city often doesn't correct for times when the market corrects. So for example, 2012, 2013, in my opinion, there was a market correction. Houses weren't selling for as much as they were a year or two before that. So there was a little bit of a decline, and then it went back up again. But the city didn't reassess your value. So if your value was $250, they didn't drop it down to modify for that correction. They just kept increasing
Yeah.
it. So I also think kind of last year was a little bit of a blip. I feel like there was a little bit of a correction there as well too. So the city will constantly be reassessing. They don't step into your property.
Nope.
They don't know the things that you've done to the house. They don't know the condition of your home. They don't know any of that. So they're just looking at the stats on your house saying it's this big, it has this many bedrooms, this is what it's worth, or whatever variables they look at.
And it's not even necessarily what it's worth. What they do is they work off of a budget of what your community needs that year.
Yeah.
And they assess your property based on that.
Exactly.
So it's not, it's a
It's
wealth
a
of
guideline.
factors
Yeah.
of what your home actually does have. That's true. But it's not basing it off of what similar houses are selling for.
Absolutely.
That's not their job though.
No, and it's not. That's definitely
our
not their
job.
Exactly. And so, although we can appreciate and we do look at it as kind of a rough gauge, it's definitely not the only variable we look at when we're looking at market value.
Right.
We want to make sure that your house is priced properly because of the three things that we concern ourselves with, which is exposure, presentation, and price. Price is by far
The
rules them
most
all.
important.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make sure that you're in the right price point to make sure you're setting everybody's expectations properly and setting your own expectations properly. I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely.
And I will say this, there are times where the property assessment is much lower than the market value. So don't get me wrong. If a house has been gutted, completely redone, and it's an older home, the city will have no idea about that, thankfully. Unless they read it online, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing to take into consideration, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But in the off chance that you get your property assessment and you recently purchased, for example, so let's say you bought a house, you bought it for $300,000, and then you get the property assessment this year and it comes in at $350,000. Well, guess what you can do? You can go and appeal your property taxes. So if you feel that there is a massive discrepancy between what your home is worth and what the city is assessing it, don't be afraid to appeal it. Your appeal may go nowhere or it may go somewhere, but in some cases it can be
Yeah.
hundreds of dollars of savings a year for you to simply assess it. Appeal it.
Appeal it.
Yeah.
So it's what it's worth to you. But we will put the link up for you.
Absolutely. We'll put it on our FAQ page on our website later on today. And so just think about that. And then also, if you're not 100% sure and you need kind of a rough gauge of what it is, don't be afraid to ask. Ask a realtor, ask someone you know that you trust to help you out with that. Because like I said, it can be quite onerous, our property taxes, and so you want to make sure that they're assessing it at the right price.
Because it'll affect your monthly. It's big time.
Absolutely. Yep. So,
Okay, so
on to the forecast breakfast.
I missed the forecast.
It was so good. We had this guy come in from CIBC.
Right.
He's the chief economist guy. His name is, if I get this wrong, I'm sorry, Benjamin Tal, I believe is
Yep.
his name. Amazing. I heard him three years ago.
3 years ago.
And he was just so good. And he's so funny. And he has a way of just putting things in a real, as an economist, obviously, theory can get pretty complicated.
And dry.
But he's
Dry.
far from that. So he had a really good perspective on it.
It's got a great accent. Is that?
Yeah. He was really. He was funny and he was very interesting.
Sad. So the theme of the forecast breakfast is cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
So we are optimistic, but we're not unrealistic.
No.
So our predictions for 2019, based on what Winnipeg Realtors have kind of come up with based on last year and looking at the historical numbers, these are the predictions. So our home sales should increase by 0 to 3%. So they give a range for everything. That's what their home sales are. Home prices, though, should increase between 0 to 2%.
What's the difference between those two things?
Okay, so home sales is actually it's the volume of sales of houses. So it's how many houses sell per year.
Yeah.
So we should see an increase in that. And then obviously the prices is how much each product will sell for. So we should see an increase in that.
Yeah.
So it'll either be stagnant or an increase, but we're not expecting a decrease.
Yeah.
But that I could have told you that. Only because
Our chief economist here at Element.
No.
Is
only because Manitoba, Winnipeg, stability lives here.
Yeah.
We're not doing this.
Yeah.
We do this.
Yeah, exactly. Minor modifications.
And so we're just Anyway, I could have said we're not doing anything, or I might do a 1% increase.
I like that. I would have been like 0 to 10%. Let's
Yeah,
just
somewhere
gamble
in there.
something in there. No, just joking. No, it is good, and it is. despite the fact that other markets are doing a lot worse than we are. So, for example, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver has had a down year, Toronto's had a down year. There's only been a handful that have actually gone up. So, like Montreal and a few others, or a couple others, have done fairly well. So for us to be within that price, within that kind of increase,
Yeah.
is actually quite
It's
good.
It's great.
Because it means it's a little bit more of a balanced market. We're not having buyers have to compete on against 10 other offers. And I always tell this, it's always actually quite funny. People are always like, well, when's the best time to sell, right? And I think we've discussed this, right? But the funny thing is, when you think about it, if you're in a buyer's market, which means that there's a lot of houses on the market and you're selling your house, you go, well, now's not a good time to sell. Well, no, because at the end of the day, you may not make as much on your house, but then you're going to get a killer deal on the buyer side,
Yeah.
right, when buying. And the same as in the seller's market. If it's a great hot seller's market, you might overpay a little bit on that house, but when you go to sell your house, you're going to make a killing as well too. So again,
Two things there is
Yeah.
it's all relative,
absolutely.
and it's always going to even out when you're a buyer and a seller.
Yes. Now, if you're just buying, then yeah, there's different
Totally.
markets that are better
Or
to buy
just
in.
selling.
Exactly, or just selling. So I mean, yeah, that's why I always find it hard to answer that question of predicting when's a great time to sell, other than time of year, given market conditions. Because at the end of the day, if you have to sell your house, you have to sell your house, right, and move on with your life.
Yeah. Alternatively, for condo owners, we
Yes.
are probably going to see another decrease.
Yeah.
So the prediction there is either a 2% decrease and the range is to 0. So we'll either see a small decrease or no change at all.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at. And the total MLS dollar, not that this means anything to you.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. But we might see an increase on that.
Yeah. That just shows us how our overall city is doing in terms of the market. But,
The belief, though, is that 2019 will look better than 2018 from a market perspective.
yeah, market. Yeah.
Not in huge ways and big waves, just slightly, incrementally better.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's and the reason that this all comes together is there's 4 positive factors that we're seeing in Winnipeg, despite the external factors like NAFTA, the possibility of interest rates hiking again, as well as the mortgage stress test, which I believe everyone's used to that now. It's been like a year and a half. I think we're all pretty used to it. But the things that are helping on our side, the economy, very
stable.
very stable. Our population,
Yeah, our population is, although at one time we had a lot more of our baby boomers, because of immigration and different things that are happening in the city, we are changing that a little bit, and so now we're getting a lot more younger people
Yes.
and whatnot. Yeah.
the metropolitan region is growing. If you've taken note, there is more infrastructure. There are things happening.
Yeah.
Not just in downtown. We've got the center port. We've got things happening that if you're paying attention, we are growing as a city.
Absolutely.
And the number one thing I think is our housing remains affordable despite everything. We have an increase in people, we have an increase in infrastructure, but our housing is still incredibly affordable.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into 2019, I think it was kind of nice to hear the fact that that we are stable, that things are better. Hopefully the Bank of Canada will do no more, if any, more increases. Hopefully they'll maybe just do 1 or 2 more at most. Again, our interest rates are fairly affordable, but hopefully that'll stabilize. Hopefully a couple other things will come into play. NAFTA will be finalized, or the new NAFTA will finalize. And we will, actually this was one interesting point that Benjamin brought up at the Forecast Breakfast. He talked about our mortgage stress test rules. So that was introduced a year ago, or a year and a half ago?
Like October of 2017.
Right.
Yes.
So that stress test says, okay, if you want to buy a house, the current interest rate is around 3%. You actually have to get pre-approved, or you have to be able to afford your mortgage at 5.5% versus the 3%. So what that does is it actually, if initially at 3% you can afford $350,000 house, if you're being tested at 5.5 or 6% or whatever that number is, it means that your affordability goes down, because obviously that's double the interest, which means your payment would almost double as well too. So that means you can afford, maybe instead of $350, you can only afford $300 or $250 or whatever that number is.
I think it's 30% less.
Yeah, so that's substantial
Yes.
when you're looking at houses that are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what I thought was interesting is Benjamin and maybe a few other people at that higher level of government and monetary policy has actually mentioned, like, why can't that stress test percentage be different for every place? So the reason that they introduced a lot of that was to kind of curb two markets, so Toronto and Vancouver, because they were going crazy. Like, what's their median? It's something like $700,000 or $800,000. Like, it's
Vancouver's
insane.
1.3.
That's insanity, and like, we're talking just a basic home for that much. Like, that's dumb.
Toronto, I think, is around 9.
That's ridiculous.
Crazy.
So anyways, they were wanting to curb those markets. So this is how they did that, is by introducing the stress test. And so it's worked fabulously. But what happened is it was kind of punishing the rest of the markets as well too. And in a market like ours, where we were kind of chugging along just fine, we're not going crazy on price points, we didn't need as much of a correction. So what he had mentioned is, why can't every market govern what makes sense for their market? So for example, Newfoundland, they don't need this stress test to curb their market. They're already, it's already a little, exactly, they're already slower as it is. So theirs could be a lot, that stress test amount could be a lot less. Winnipeg could be as well too. Montreal could be a little higher because they're going at a little bit more rapid a pace. Toronto and Vancouver could be the same when they were a little bit more robust. So that was a really interesting concept, and I hope that the government and the policy, the monetary policy rule makers, kind of think about that, because we have a very diverse market. Canada is very diverse, both with their people that live here, but as well as our markets. They don't all need to be harnessed the same way two markets in our city, in our country do. So
Yeah.
I thought that was very, very interesting, and I thought it was something worth discussing for sure.
Absolutely, and I'm for the stress test.
Sure,
Against
absolutely.
popular belief, I am for it, because what we see is people overbuying and becoming house poor, and that is the worst thing. As realtors, we don't want to see that for you at all.
Absolutely.
So it would be nice if our stress test, like Benjamin was saying, was maybe just a few percentages lower than the coastal cities where we're seeing that problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that would be really nice to see. But you know, we're just here having coffee. We can't change anything.
We're just having a little coffee on Monday
can't
morning.
change
So.
anything.
So
Maybe
anyway,
we will. I don't know.
who knows? Who knows what's next? No, just
Prime Minister.
Anywho, I think that is everything we want to chat about this morning.
So. I think just so you guys know, kind of the summation of this is we have an increase of supply of homes. We have affordable housing. It is a great time to get into the market if that's something that you're looking into doing. If you're looking into selling and then, you know, purchasing that next home, also a great time for you too.
Absolutely.
So if you have questions about anything that we just talked about, if you need a market valuation, if you need to sit down with us about a plan for purchasing in 2019, just give us
a call. Absolutely.
Call, text, DM.
Do we ever say our names when we do?
No, but I think people know. But
I hope you all know who we are. I'm Monica Kessler, and this is Monica Manette. Just in case.
Yes.
I'm glad we did this at the end, because that seems really appropriate.
Hey, guys.
So, hi, what's up? So anywho, that's that, I think. So you guys have a great week. Try to stay warm. Try not to get snowed in. And hopefully we'll talk next week. If you guys ever have any questions that you want us to discuss, feel free to messenger us.
DM. It's called a DM.
Oh, I'm sorry. DM us. That would.
It's a good thing there's a millennial on the team, because she'd be like,
"Hey, I am an aging
can
millennial.
You fax
okay,
us? Can you fax us your question?"
I hate when people ask if I have a fax number. No, it is 2019. I do not have a fax number. Anywho, with that,
thanks, guys.
We leave you. Have a good day.
Have a great week.